This Corregidor was the Rock Island fortress that guarded the entrance to Manila Bay, and it was very impressive. A lot of history there. So we got into the bay just a little bit. The ship stopped, and some small boats came out and got some supplies. And we turned around. While I was there, or we were there, I counted 42 ships sunk in the Manila Bay. Just the masts and the smokestacks were sticking out above the water. The water was quite shallow, and that was amazing. After about an hour there, and this was getting to be around 10 o'clock in the morning, the ship turned around, sailed down the west side of along the coast, about 60 or 70 miles, came to a little town called Batangas. And this was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. And there was no port there, so we had to disembark over the ship with rope ladders, and that was real tricky. Some of the men had some real problems with that. We went down to landing craft. The landing craft took us into the shore. From there, large trucks picked us up and took us inland. There we were joined the 11th Airborne. It was Tent City. 13,000 men were living in tents. They've been in a lot of heavy battles. The normal strength of the 11th Airborne was 15,000 men, and there was 12,000 of them still there. They had lost around 3,000 men in the battles. So our 3,000 brought them up to full strength. I was assigned to a large tent with 7 other men. Platoon sergeant, his name was Bruno Cuss. One day, when he and I were alone in the tent, he told me about some of the banzai attacks he had been in. And a banzai attack is where the Japanese come at you and you either kill them or they kill you. There's no retreating. So the second one he told me about how he had taken his men to secure a hill. They dug foxholes, and he could hear those Japanese down in a hollow in the trees. It was fairly quiet until it started getting dark, and then they started drinking. And they kept getting louder and louder, and he knew what was coming. It had been through this before. And about 10:30 that evening, here they came, whooping and hollering. They said they were just making all kinds of noise. They was trying to scare us, I guess. So one of his men was killed during that fight, and he said it was just terrible. He says, I just, tears started rolling down his face, and he said, I just can't stand to kill people. So 2 weeks later, medics came and took him away, and I don't know where they took him to, probably a hospital ship or something. So then then on a Saturday morning at around 10 o'clock, a couple of us men decided to go out for a little pass and catch football. So we went up a slight hill, and on the right was battalion headquarters. And this area we were in was, of course, coconut trees, and it was just a big canopy everywhere. And after we were doing a little bit of that football training, why 2 Filipinos came up over the hill, real scroungy looking fellows. One was carrying a burlap bag. And as they got closer, I noticed that there was a lot of stain on the bottom of the bag, and I asked one of the veterans that was with us there, I said, wonder what those men are carrying? And he said, you don't want to know. And they went into battalion headquarters, and we continued with our game, and then later on I asked him again, and he said, we pay the Filipino people, they're bounty hunters, and those would be heads in those bags. And oh, that made me sick. And he said, well, that's a whole lot better than for us to go out there and have to get them. And at the base of our camp was a huge mountain called Mount McLeod, and it was covered in dense vegetation, and there were a lot of Japanese soldiers still on that mountain in caves, but they were not much of a threat because the main body of Japanese army had been secured, and they were defeated, so they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to those people. But a lot of the Japanese people stayed in caves for years and years over there in different places. It's hard to understand. We started our training for the invasion of Japan, and I had 2 more parachute training jumps, and we were not looking forward to that invasion. We all knew that we would be killing women and children during the invasion, and a great portion of us would be killed too. So on August the 6th, we heard that a bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and all we heard was it was a large bomb. We had no radios, no newspapers, no communications hardly with the outside world other than through the Filipino people that would see, and battalion headquarters would send down some information from time to time on a sheet what was going on. So we went ahead with our training, no change. August the 9th, another bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, and then we heard all about that. They thought, well, maybe, just maybe, this war might end, and the attitude of everybody changed. Our training stopped, and we just kind of waited around for something to happen. And August the 12th, my platoon sergeant came to me and said, you should be pleased. He says, of the 15,000 11th Airborne paratroopers, you have been selected to be one of General MacArthur's honor guards. Well, that's not too bad. So I said, well, what will our duties be? And he said, well, when we occupy Japan, and we hope it soon, you will be with him, guarding him around the clock. So 3 days later, it was August the 12th, we were picked up by a truck, and this was the guard units, and we were taken, there was 2 or 3 trucks, and we were taken north to Nichols Field, which was an airport, and Nichols Field was at the end of the Ginkgo line that was constructed at the beginning of the war from Manila to Nichols Field. It was called the Ginkgo Defense Line. The Japanese had the Filipino people build this line, and when the line was finished, they killed every one of the Filipino people so they couldn't disclose how it was built and so forth. So this was one of the items that the Filipino people had no use for the Japanese. We waited at Nichols Field for about 2 hours, and we boarded a plane, and we left, and we still didn't know for sure where we were going. And when we were in the air, where the pilot told us that they were taking us to Okinawa, we arrived at Okinawa about 4:30 in the afternoon, and as we came in for the landing strip, which was right along the ocean, we could see dense smoke up the coast. And the pilot said, well, the kamikazes are hitting our ships again today. And during the war, 4,620 of these suicide pilots, called kamikazes, died flying their planes loaded with explosives into American ships. This was just a little bit more than 9/11. Of course, not all of them hit the ships, of course. They started when they were bombing or trying to fly their planes in the ships. Most of them were shot out of the sky, but then they changed their tactics and they started bringing in waves of planes, and that changed it totally. There was no way you could shoot all of them down, so many of them were able to come and hit the ships. When we got off of the plane and waiting for trucks to pick us up to take us inland, I saw way out in the distance some little black spots coming. And I watched and watched, and it kept getting closer. And it looked kind of like a bunch of geese flying, but they were darker than that. Then I started hearing motors, and got closer, and they were bombers flying in a convoy. I'd never seen that before and never will see it again. They were tailgating each other, and they came in for the landing, and there was about 400 or 500 feet apart. Still in this convoy, there was 9 of them, and one didn't come in quite right, so he banked real hard, turned, and got in on the tail end of the line. As they would hit the runway, they would go down and peel off to the left, peel off to the right, bang, bang, just like that. Oh, those guys they are cowboys. That was amazing. You just can't understand pilots being that brave, or maybe careless. So we were taken to a field, and I couldn't quite determine what they were raising in that field, and we were out in the open, no trees around us, just these fields, and they dropped us off, and there we sat. So all we had was our backpack and one blanket and one change of clothes again, and we waited and waited, lay out a blanket, play some cards. Real boring. This was first day was the 13th of August. We waited and waited, and on the 19th day of August, 2 planes flew over, snow white with green crosses, and they were Betty bombers, Japanese Betty bombers. We assumed that they were a envoy going to the Philippines to negotiate a peace settlement with MacArthur, and this proved to be true. Here's the planes right here. So we kept waiting and waiting, and nothing happened. And it was just, time was dragging on us very heavily. And we didn't know that there was a lot of internal problems going on in Japan. Some of the military was trying to overthrow the government and continue the war, and they had a hard time getting all that worked out. On the 29th of August, we were picked up by truck about 4:30 in the morning and taken to the airstrip, and as we looked down the airstrip, there were C-54s, 4-motor planes, bright silver. They didn't have to be camouflaged in. As far as you could see, there must have been at least 100 or 150 planes. And when we boarded the plane, we knew that we were the first ones that would be landing in Japan because there was no one else there. We took off, and nice clear day. We flew up the west side of Japan, got up and started turning into Tokyo Bay, and off to our left was Mount Fuji, a beautiful mountain, little snow on it. As we started to turn, we were all wondering, and I'm sure, speaking for myself only, we were wondering that what would we find on the ground? Would the Japanese there know that they were supposed to be surrendering. We had no idea what to expect. The plane came into the Atsigi airfield, and as we came down, I could see a lot of craters along the edge of the runway. And I thought, well, I sure hope we got a good pilot, because we don't want to land in one of those craters. We landed safely, got off the plane. We had our rifles under the seats and our backpacks. We put those on, loaded our rifles, and we all went and hunkered down by the corner of a hangar building. And it was a grassy area. And when the plane took off, we just felt like we were abandoned. There was no Japanese people there. There was no other Americans. We were by ourselves. So about 30 minutes later, some planes started landing on some of the other runways in a distance, and we could see there were 11th Airborne paratroopers coming in. So we had a sigh of relief. We waited and waited, and nothing happened there for quite some time. And then around noon, a plane came in with the 11th Airborne Band. They set up in front of the hangar building, and then another plane brought in 4 or 5 major generals, and I recognized 2 of them. And then a lot of reporters and photographers started coming in on planes, and the Japanese came in by automobiles. So 2 o'clock, here comes this plane with the name Bataan on it, and everyone cheered and said, well, there's the general. So he landed on the airstrip right in front of the hangar, and as he stepped out, there was a ladder step-like, and he stood on the first rung, and it must have been at least 40 or 60 photographers and reporters gathered around him, taking the pictures. And of course, the guard members, we couldn't even get close to him because there were so many other people. So he must have been on that platform about 2 minutes or more, and it was one of his finest hours, I'm certain. Got off the ladder or the walkway and went over, and the generals greeted him, and the band was playing some of his favorite tunes. And he went over to the band leader. His name was Sergeant Cross, and he said, Sergeant Cross, that is the sweetest music I've ever heard. So after an hour there, I guess there was a lot of congratulations going on between him and the generals and whatever. We noticed a convoy being formed along one of the airstrips, and not too far from where we're at.